All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, To Move or Not to Move Your Records. We're really excited everyone can join us. And the first thing I always like to do at the beginning of webinars is just introduce our speakers. My name is Shayna Horka, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at Gimel. I'm joined today by our key speaker, Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Meisenheimer. Now, before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping items that I want to go over. There will be a few poll questions throughout the webinar, so please keep an eye out for those, and we're going to go over the results as a group. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen at any time throughout the webinar, and Dean will answer as many as he can after the presentation. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Now, before I hand it over to Dean, as you can see, I have one slide here to tell you a little bit about Gimel. Gimel is a records information management and governance software company that was founded in 2002. We have a client success team and global network of partners that have been delivering solutions with us for more than 17 years. Our primary technology partners are Microsoft and SAP. And our implementation partners include small specialty SIs with specific areas of expertise, as well as large global SIs and consultants like PwC and Lockheed Martin. Gimel's product suite includes document management for SAP solutions, content governance for SharePoint, and records management. Our family of software products work together to help you create an efficient digital workplace. Now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dean so he can begin the presentation.
Thank you, Shayna. As Shayna mentioned, my name is Dean Meisenheimer. I'm the Director of Sales Engineering here at Gimel. I've had the opportunity to kind of be in this market space for this past 25 years or so. When I began in this space, it was still imaging and document management and records management, all as kind of standalone technologies, right? Really focused on very specific use cases. And over time, we saw the market begin to consolidate. We saw things come together, and a lot of those technologies morphed into enterprise content management solutions. Those began to include imaging and document management and records management, all as part of a holistic solution, along with other technologies like collaboration and web content management and others. And over time, now that a lot of that has moved into the cloud, and there are now cloud platforms out there. And so really today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of just how things have changed, the difference in the kind of models that you see out there for how people want to address records, and different things you should take into consideration. But before we start, we're going to hit you with one of those poll questions that Shayna mentioned. First question is simply, do you have a records management system in place today? Yes, no, maybe you only have a system for managing physical records, or maybe you have more than one system. But take a minute, vote. It's all anonymous, so we won't call anybody out. And let us know kind of what you have, and we'll show the results here once we get everybody's answer. Wait just a moment here for the results to come up. And they're tabulating away in the background. And here we go. So 44% of you have a solution in place today, which is great. I'm going to be kind of curious to hear some of the questions that may come. Very small percentage said no. A few of you only have solutions for physical records, right? Only managing the boxes and items in the warehouse. And a reasonable amount have multiple systems, which very well could be a cross, part of that's a crossover of the folks with physical and electronic. So great job. So let's move into the kind of the meat of it. And really, when you look at records management, there are two approaches you can choose from. I'll let you guess, but the title kind of gives it away, doesn't it? There's the centralized approach and the federated, or what's sometimes referred to as in-place records management. Well, centralized has kind of been the traditional model, right? That's the model that grew out of that ECM model where everything went into a singular repository. Everything was put into that repository. And all of the services, including records management, were all delivered in that repository, right? So everything had to be put into one location. Federated has emerged as an alternative over the past few years, where solutions are in place now where the policy management is centralized. The file plan creation, the retention life cycles, the disposition management, that is centralized, but the policy themselves is pushed out onto the content where it's at rest in the respective repositories. So it's a bit of a change. And one of the things that has driven that change is really the cloud, right? Cloud-based content services platforms have emerged like Box and Microsoft 365, formerly known as Office 365. And those have kind of changed the landscape as well. Now, that doesn't mean those couldn't be used as a centralized solution, but they've had an impact on how people have looked at their records management. So with a centralized approach, you typically have kind of your corporate infrastructure where you have different systems your users may work in to address various business functions. That could be legacy ECM solutions, could be SharePoint, older SharePoint on-prem environments. There's the network file shares that everybody still has. And then there are the cloud-based platforms like Box and Microsoft 365 and others, right? But these are the systems that are used to do business. But in a centralized approach, there's a central records management system deployed. That could be one of the cloud solutions. It could be a brand new solution. But there's a central RM designated, and that central records management system may also serve as the primary content management repository for the organization. That's what delivers your content services, your check-in, check-out, your library services, your security, the collaboration tools. And it also is what provides records management functionality, right? That is all built into that solution. And so what happens is content has to be moved into that system to fall under records management control. That either means for legacy systems you may want to retire, the content has to be migrated. Metadata has to be mapped over, security models have to be mapped over, and everything has to be moved in before you can retire the old system. Or if those systems are still active, you need to have a connection where content at some point in its life cycle is moved off the file share or out of SharePoint or Box into the record system. Right now, maybe a shortcut or what's called typically a stub is left behind to point to that new location, but the content is getting moved. And so it's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. Everything about the records is done in that repository. Here's one example of centralized records management actually using SharePoint. Microsoft introduced records management into SharePoint back with SharePoint 2010. Vendors like Gimel, Gimel introduced the first DoD certified records management extension for SharePoint that allowed a SharePoint record center to become a DoD certified records repository. But again, it was a centralized model. Records needed to be in SharePoint. They needed to be moved into the record center. Your records management functionality that a records manager would use was all managed through the ribbon in SharePoint. So things like cutoff reviews and case-based records, even your file plan management, that all happened inside SharePoint, right? So that's an example of the centralized approach to things. And this product is Gimel still offers this product today as our certified records management product for clients that need DoD functionality. Well, the pros and the cons of the centralized model, right? And with any option, there are always pros and cons. So the pros, one is control. Everything's in one place. Everything's in one repository. The records functionality is there. You can put security around the records part of the repository and limit who has access to the records. You have absolute control over everything right there, right? If you need something like DoD 5015.2 certification on a records repository, that can be met by a centralized records management solution. The cons, the user experience may suffer, right? Your end users now may see their content move. They may have to work with a different system. Your records managers have to work within the content management experience, right? It may not be the most comfortable experience for everybody. And there's a cost. When you deploy a centralized system, especially if you're deploying a new solution, you now have a certain amount of redundancy with your other content services solutions you may have. If you already have SharePoint, you already have Box, and yet you deploy a records management solution that provides a set of redundant services, there's overlap there, right? And there's cost and maintenance and everything else that go with that. And then lastly is complexity. Again, for your end users, content's getting moved around. It's getting moved out of their source repository. They may now have to navigate a new repository to find it. For your records team, there has to be a basic understanding of the repository and the repository structure and the administration of that repository. And for your system administrators, that things like that mapping of metadata as content is pulled in, of security as things are pulled in. If one set of users has read access in one repository, do they still need the read access in the records management system? How do you map that? How do you set that up? Those are the kinds of things that have to be taken into consideration. In a federated approach, we'll use the same kind of corporate infrastructure here: legacy ECM, SharePoint, file shares, cloud-based content services. Those systems are deployed based on the business requirements and what the business users need to do their job. Records management is deployed as a centralized policy hub that can be deployed on premise. In a lot of cases now, it's deployed as a SaaS offering. It sits in the cloud, and connectors allow that system to reach into the different content services you may have, whether those are cloud-based or whether those are on-prem. Your file plan, your retention schedule, your disposition is all centrally managed in the records management solution. That's a dedicated environment for your records team that's really designed for them, has a user interface designed for them, and allows them to work there. And then the policy is pushed out. The content stays in place. It stays in Box. It stays in SharePoint. It stays in the ECM or on the file share. The policy gets pushed out and placed on that content where it's at. The records management system gives the records managers a single view of what's being managed across the different locations, but your content's not moving around. And here's an example of the federated or in-place approach. This is Gimel Records Management. You can see on the dashboard here, it's actually connected to and managing records in SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Premise, a network file share, a Documentum environment, as well as physical records. I have one solution managing records in all of those locations. I have visibility of those records regardless of where they may be, but as a records manager, I have one place to go. And that's kind of the difference with the federated model. The policies are centralized, the content stays where it's at so your users can work with it there. And so again, when we take a look at the pros and the cons, the pros are your end user experience doesn't change. They continue, your end users, your business users will continue to work in the respective systems that they work in today, right? Their content never leaves it. They simply add content in, and as content is added, records are automatically classified based on different policies. Can be based on where the records are at, what the records are, what the information is in those records, any combination of things, but the classification just kind of happens based on the policies you as a records manager set up. Some of the cons or things you have to consider are, well, now there are connectors that have to be managed, right? The connectors are what allow the centralized system, especially if it's SaaS-based, to see your records. And that may create concerns about storing records in the cloud. Now, 5 years ago, when cloud-based records management first came about, I heard a lot more concerns from clients about putting records in the cloud. In a federated model, the only thing being stored potentially in the cloud is information about the records, not the records themselves, but there was still nervousness about that. And what I've seen evolve over the last few years is that nervousness has gone away. clients have begun to realize the cloud oftentimes can be more secure than their own environments because of the time and the attention the infrastructure vendors like Microsoft and others have put into developing their cloud platforms, as well as the application vendors building the applications on top of those clouds. But IT often has concerns. How does the SaaS environment connect? How are the connectors working? What permissions do they need inside the repositories? How is information flowing back and forth? Is it encrypted? And those are conversations you'll have with an IT or security organization, quite frankly, about any SaaS-based product, right? So those are the kind of things that have to be dealt with. So it's time for another poll question. And this is a pretty simple one, but do you need DoD 5015.2 certified records management? No, it's not a requirement. Yes, we're absolutely mandated to. We have to have it. Or it's a nice to have. It's kind of a feel-good thing. You know, if the repository is certified, it makes us feel better, but we don't have to have it. So let us know. And by the way, as we go through the webinar, you don't have to wait until the end to ask questions. Feel free to put questions into the Q&A panel at any point, and I'll address them either as they come up or at the end. So I'm kind of curious to see, we've seen realistically a decrease in the number of folks that need DoD, and the panel's kind of showing that, right? Almost half say no, it's not a requirement. Only 21% say yes, it's mandated. We have to have that, right? And the other 32%, it's a nice to have, right? It would be nice if it has it, but that's not mandated. So good information. So here are some points to ponder, things to think about as you begin to think through your records management strategy, whether you are deploying a new system, replacing an old system, you know, whatever it may be. The first, has your company standardized on a content services platform? If your company is standardized, for example, on Microsoft 365, and that's the direction for the future, is selecting a standalone records management system in your best interest, right? Do you want to, implement something that's totally different from everything else that you may be using? Next question is, or next point to ponder is, do you have legacy ECM systems in place? Do you have existing systems that may already have records in them, right? Are you doing records management in another system? If you are, and you want to move to a new solution, how do you move those records over? How do you move records over and maintain where they're at in the current retention lifecycle? If something is 3 years into a 7-year retention, just because you move it to a new records management system doesn't mean you get to restart the clock, right? So you have to take these kind of things into consideration as you look at that. Does your company have a cloud strategy, right? Is your company adopting a cloud-first strategy where they want everything in the cloud unless there's a specific reason why it shouldn't be? If they do, then you need to look at cloud-based solutions, obviously, which can take you back to that first bullet. What will you do with your physical records? We all still have boxes on shelves in file rooms or in warehouses. Does physical records need to be incorporated into your electronic record strategy? And whatever solution you choose needs to be able to deal with that. Do you need certified records management? Going back to our previous poll question, that will absolutely influence your decision, right? If you're part of that 32% or that 21% that does need it. And then the maintenance and the support cost. If you decide to implement a standalone records management system, does that create redundancy? Does that increase your maintenance and support costs? If by moving to a content services platform your company is already standard on, can you retire existing systems? Oftentimes, the difference in the the retirement of that system, the maintenance and support costs that you no longer have to pay, can fund your records management program. And how much content do you have on file shares, right? Those file shares out there. What do we do with those? So I'm going to take 1 second and just talk about migration, because file shares are always something that come up as clients look at implementing records management. What do they do with the file shares? Well, the obvious choice is, well, we'll just copy it all into our new content services platform and off we go. It's not always that easy. The one thing you need to know when you're going to migrate content is know what you have. What content is active, what content is inactive, and what content can be deleted, right? Active content is information that still may be used. It's going through changes. It's active content used in the day-to-day of the business. It's high-value content. Inactive may just be living out its life, sitting. It's been archived, isn't really used, but it's not stuff you can get rid of. It's lower-value content. And delete, typically it's referred to as ROT, redundant, obsolete, and trivial. That's information you can get rid of, right? Project plans from 10 years ago, or HR documents for employees that are, that have been left the company 15 years ago, or whatever it may be, but it's information you can get rid of. And one of the reasons you need to think through this process is, if you just take everything on a file share and dump it into, let's say, a cloud-based content services platform, what you now have is a really nice cloud-based mess versus an on-prem network file share mess. But doing a migration can be a large project in and of itself, and I'll give you We had a client, they had 3 million documents, which in the big picture of things isn't that much, but they had 3 million documents to migrate. We did an analysis, did some testing, and determined using some migration scripts, we could move 3,600 documents per hour per migration job that was running, right? So that's how quickly we could migrate documents into their new system. Well, doing the simple math, 3 million divided by 3,600 means 833 hours of migration processing time. And when you break that down into days, running 4 simultaneous migration jobs, 8 hours a day, it took 26 days to migrate that content, or basically over the course of 13 weekends. So what are you doing this summer, right? Migrating content on the weekends? It can be a major effort, right, to migrate content, and you need to think that through as part of your approach. So real quick, one way to approach the problem: if you're using a cloud-based content services platform, use that as your records repository. Do a ROT analysis, get rid of the stuff you can get rid of off your file shares, and then put a migration strategy in place where maybe you migrate high-value content initially, low-value content stays on the file share, and then you use a federated records management approach to begin placing policy on your cloud-based content and letting older content on the file shares, even in legacy solutions, live out its life cycle. And then if you need DoD 5015.2 certification or other certifications, maybe you take a hybrid approach. Because one of the things we've discovered is it's a small percentage of records sometimes that need to be in a DoD repository, not everything, right? So you can take a SharePoint-based approach for those records, use a federated approach for all of your other records if you need to. And we've seen clients take that approach. So some closing thoughts, and then we'll hit the questions. There's not a right or a wrong answer here. A federated approach gives you flexibility in implementation, in migration, and what you do with your content. A centralized approach is a little more complex, but there are situations where it may be required. Look at your requirements, figure out what you need to do, figure out realistically what you can do from a budget standpoint and a time standpoint, and put a strategy in place. And don't create more silos of information, right? I think that's a key. Don't create one more silo of information that's going to have to be dealt with 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And then, and this is critical, like any project, user adoption is the key to success. Don't make this a disruptive process. Implementing records process shouldn't be disruptive to the end users. There may be some changes. You need to train them on what those changes are, but don't make records management become such a chore for your end users. They quickly figure out how to bypass the process, right? So with that, we're going to open it up for some questions.
Looks like we got a couple in the chat.
Yeah, a couple have come in the chat here. You know, the first one, do most clients go federated or centralized? I would say these days we see most clients going federated, more with a SaaS-based approach than an on-prem approach. But federated has definitely taken the lead over doing the centralized approach. But we still have clients doing both. Is Microsoft 365 a centralized or a federated approach? Well, if you just use the out-of-the-box tools, I would say it's centralized because all of the tools that Microsoft 365 provides through the Security and Compliance Center and others require content to be in Microsoft 365, right? So you do still have to centralize that content. One that came in the chat, how can event-based retention be applied to file shares when there's no event date metadata field? It's a great question. So if records are going to be kept, in the use case that was mentioned is, I have records that need to be kept 10 years after equipment is retired. Well, I'll give you our approach, which is records get classified against a record class, right? So I know based on record titles, I know based on where the records are at, even if they're on a file share, right? I can make a determination as to what these are. And I can then classify those against a specific record class. I could even assign those to a case-based record class, right? So I could put all of the records for, let's say, compressor 123 into a single record case. 10 years after that compressor is taken offline, I can retire those records. You know, event-based doesn't have to be tied to a date. The event instance is created on a specific date, but the retention, the life cycle then is based on 10 years from the creation of the event, not a specific date. That's one way to do it. And there are others. We could certainly talk about more examples. Are we going to distribute the recording? Yes, we will. It'll be posted online for replay. And Shane, I'm not sure if a follow-up email goes out or
Yep.
not with a link to that?
Via email.
Okay. And then does DML meet requirements set up by the International Council of Archives? We've worked with a number of different archives. That one off the top of my head, I don't know, but we've worked with a lot, for example, with the National Archives in the US, with a lot of state archives to transfer records and information to those, to those archives at a point in time. I will capture that and get you a specific answer after the webinar. Are there any other questions from anyone? Going once, going twice. Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks for the follow-up on that. We do have a number of municipal clients in Canada and commercial clients in Canada. So my gut feeling is the answer to that is yes, but again, I'll verify that for you. Thank you for the follow-up, by the way. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions then, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found this informative and look forward to our next webinars coming up here over the next few weeks. Shane, I'll flip it back to you to close it out.
Awesome. Now, if anybody has any further questions, Dean's email is right there on the screen. You can also visit our website, which is also on the screen, or email info@gimmel.com. And again, for those interested in the recording of this webinar, we'll be sending it out via email within 24 to 48 hours. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.